All right, let's go. Number 10. The deception that saved Western civilization. In September of 480 BC, the Athenian general Themistocles found himself commanding roughly 370 Greek triremes against a Persian fleet that outnumbered him by more than 2-1. The narrow strait between the island of Salamis and the Greek mainland was choked with warships. Xerxes I, king of Persia, had already burned Athens to the ground. By every conventional measure, Greece was finished. What Themistocles understood was something his enemy did not, that the strait itself was a weapon, if only he could lure the Persians inside it. A massive fleet needs room to maneuver. Squeeze it into a narrow channel, and its numbers become a liability. But the Greek alliance was fracturing, with commanders arguing to retreat. Themistocles needed the Persians to attack before his own side collapsed, so he committed what appeared to be treason. He dispatched his personal servant, a man named Sisinus, across the water with a secret message for Xerxes. The Greeks, the message claimed, were planning to flee that very night. The Persian king believed it. He ordered his fleet to enter the straits and block both exits, sealing the Greeks inside, exactly where Themistocles wanted them. What followed was catastrophic for Persia. Hemmed in and unable to turn, Persian ships rammed each other in the dark. Greek triremes, lighter and more agile, attacked in disciplined formation at dawn. By nightfall, Persia had lost an estimated 200 to 300 ships. Greek losses numbered around 40. Xerxes watched from a golden throne on a hillside and saw his invasion destroyed in a single afternoon. Themistocles won the Battle of Salamis without superior numbers, superior ships, or superior firepower. He won it with a lie so perfectly constructed that the enemy used it to seal his own fate. Number 9. The siege that may have started the Black Death. In 1346, the Mongol army of Jani Beg, Khan of the Golden Horde, was besieging the Genoese trading port of Kaffa on the Crimean Peninsula, the city now known as Feodosia in modern Ukraine. It was a prolonged, grinding siege, and then something far worse than the Genoese defenders arrived. The plague reached the Mongol encampment. Men began dying by the hundreds, then by the thousands. See, a besieging army that is dying faster than the enemy can kill it faces a particular kind of desperation. Jani Beg's forces, decimated by what we now recognize as Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind bubonic plague, were losing not a battle but a slow biological attrition. The fortified walls of Kaffa remained unbroken. The Genoese, supplied by sea, appeared capable of waiting out any conventional siege indefinitely. What happened next was recorded by the Genoese notary Gabriele de Musi in his manuscript Historia de Morbo. According to his account, Jani Beg ordered the corpses of his plague dead loaded onto trebuchets and hurled over the walls of Kaffa. The bodies landed inside the city. The disease spread. The Genoese defenders, now themselves falling ill, abandoned their positions and fled by ship to Constantinople, to Sicily, and to the ports of Italy. They carried something with them that they could not see. Recent scholarship, including a 2023 analysis in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, has questioned whether the catapulted corpses were truly the mechanism of transmission. Infected rats on the fleeing ships may have been equally responsible. De Musi himself was likely not present at the siege, but the account, first recorded within a decade of the events, describes the first documented act of deliberate biological warfare in military history. Whatever the precise chain of transmission, the Black Death that followed consumed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Whether or not the trebuchet was truly the vector, a Mongol commander's act of biological desperation stands at the beginning of history's most devastating pandemic. On number 8, the formation. They couldn't lose against an army that wouldn't fight. In 53 BC, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome and one-third of the ruling First Triumvirate, marched an army of approximately 35,000 Roman legionaries and cavalry into the Syrian desert near the city now known as Harran, Turkey. He was facing a Parthian force under the general Surena that numbered fewer than 10,000 men. By every accepted principle of ancient warfare, this should not have been a contest. Roman legions were the finest close combat infantry in the ancient world. Their signature defensive formation, the testudo, soldiers locking shields overhead and on all sides to form an impenetrable armored shell, was capable of advancing under arrow fire without casualties. Crassus had used it before. Every Roman commander had. The testudo was essentially a moving fortress, and against it, ordinary archery was useless. Surena had no intention of fighting ordinary archery. His cavalry of roughly 9,000 horse archers circled the Roman formations and simply refused to engage at close range, firing arrows accurately at full gallop from every direction. The technique now known as the Parthian shot. When Roman cavalry gave chase, the archers retreated and kept shooting. When Crassus's son Publius led 6,000 men in a breakout charge, Surena's heavy armored cavalry, the cataphracts, wheeled and annihilated them. Publius's severed head was thrown back into the Roman lines. The testudo worked exactly as designed. Soldiers inside it survived. But survival under a shield is not the same as winning a battle. The Parthians did not need to break the formation. If they needed only to make it stand still in the desert sun until the men inside ran out of water, courage, and any route of escape. Roman casualties reached approximately 20,000 killed and 10,000 captured. Crassus himself was killed. Surena had identified a truth that every subsequent generation of strategists would rediscover. The most devastating way to defeat a weapon is not to attack its strength, but to make its strength irrelevant. Number 7. The trap that killed 50,000 men in a single day. On August 2, 216 BC, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca deployed his army of approximately 50,000 infantry and cavalry on a flat, dust-blown plain near the village of Cani in the southern Italian region of Apulia. For facing him was a Roman force of around 80,000 men, the largest army Rome had ever fielded, assembled with the singular purpose of crushing Hannibal's invasion of Italy once and for all. What the Roman consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro saw when they looked at Hannibal's formation should have been encouraging. His weakest troops, Gauls and Spanish infantry, were placed at the center, bowing outward toward the Romans in a convex arc. His flanks were held by his elite African infantry. It looked like an army offering its softest point for attack. The Romans did exactly what Hannibal had anticipated. They massed their legions in a deep formation and drove straight into the center. The center gave way, deliberately. As the Roman mass pushed forward in triumph, the convex arc inverted, bending inward around them. Then the elite African infantry on both flanks wheeled inward. Hannibal's cavalry, having already routed the Roman horsemen on the wings, swept around to close the rear. In under an hour, 80,000 Roman soldiers found themselves packed so tightly inside a closing circle that men could barely raise their arms to fight. What happened next lasted the rest of the day. Ancient sources, Livy, Polybius, and Plutarch, record that at least 50,000 Romans died before nightfall, with some estimates reaching 70,000. Historians calculate that men were dying at a rate of more than 100 per minute during the height of the slaughter. Consul Paulus was killed. The concept Hannibal executed that day, the double envelopment, was given his name, and German generals in both world wars studied Cani as their explicit tactical model. Hannibal did not overwhelm Rome with superior numbers. He convinced Rome to annihilate itself by making his own weakness the most irresistible target on the battlefield. Number 6. The weapon whose formula died with an empire. In the summer of 672 AD, an Arab fleet launched what Byzantine Emperor Constantine IV had every reason to fear was a final, overwhelming assault on Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire was stretched, exhausted, and outnumbered on the water. Then the Arab ships encountered something no military force had ever faced before: a substance projected from bronze siphons mounted on Byzantine vessels that ignited on contact, burned on the surface of the sea itself, and could not be extinguished by water. The Arab fleet burned. The weapon became known as Greek fire, and its origins traced to a Syrian architect and engineer named Callinicus of Heliopolis, who reportedly brought the formula to Constantinople around 672 AD. Byzantine emperors treated the formula as a divine gift and a state secret of the highest order. It was used again decisively at the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717 to 718 AD, again annihilating an attacking fleet. For nearly 8 centuries, it remained the Byzantine Empire's most decisive naval weapon. What made Greek fire genuinely baffling, then and now, was its described behavior. Contemporary Byzantine sources report that it intensified when water was applied, clung to flesh like a burning gel, and continued burning even when submerged. Soldiers attempted to smother it with sand. The Byzantines deployed it not only from ships but from handheld tubes and in ceramic grenades hurled by catapult. Every attacking force that encountered it described the same terrified bewilderment. Modern chemists and historians have proposed reconstructions involving quicklime, naphtha, pine resin, and saltpeter in various combinations, but no modern formulation fully replicates all the documented properties. The secret was held so tightly within the Byzantine court that when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, the formula died with it. No document containing the complete recipe has ever been recovered. An empire's most decisive weapon, one that held off the full military power of the Arab Caliphate for nearly 50 years, was so completely protected that its destruction left no trace. Whatever burned on the waters of the Bosphorus for 8 centuries has not burned again since. Number 5. The horse that ended a 10-year war with a lie. The Greek legend holds that by approximately 1184 BC, the Achaean forces besieging the city of Troy had been camped outside its walls for a decade. Soldiers had grown old. Commanders had died. Troy's walls remained unbroken. And then, without warning, the Greek fleet appeared to sail away, leaving behind only a single, enormous wooden horse on the beach, and one man named Sinon, who had a story to tell. Troy was a deeply religious city, and the horse, Sinon explained to the Trojans, was a sacred offering to the goddess Athena. To destroy it would bring divine punishment. To bring it inside the walls would transfer Athena's protection to Troy itself. Ancient sources, including Virgil's Aeneid and Homer's Odyssey, record that the Trojan priest Laocoon pleaded against bringing the horse inside, famously warning that he feared the Greeks even when bearing gifts. He was ignored. The horse was dragged through the city gates amid celebration. The Greek soldiers hidden inside waited until the city slept. Then they opened the gates. The fleet, which had only sailed around a nearby headland, returned under cover of darkness. Troy, the city whose walls a decade of conventional siege had failed to breach, fell in a single night. Ancient tradition attributes the stratagem's design to Odysseus, the hero celebrated across Greek literature precisely for his cunning over his courage. Archaeological excavations at Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey, begun by Heinrich Schliemann in 1871, It revealed that the site of ancient Troy experienced a violent destruction consistent with the traditional date around 1180 BC. Whether the wooden horse was a literal siege engine, a symbolic account of infiltration through a postern gate, or a piece of mythology given physical form by later storytellers, the strategic principle it encodes is documented and real. The most impenetrable fortress is always vulnerable to what it willingly invites inside. The walls of Troy did not fall. The Trojans opened them, and that distinction between breaking an enemy's defenses and persuading an enemy to remove them became a category of warfare that has never gone out of use. Number 4, the retreat that was never a retreat. On April 9, 1241, Duke Henry II of Silesia led a combined force of Polish, German, and Teutonic knights against a Mongol army at the Battle of Legnica in what is now southwestern Poland. The Europeans were experienced, heavily armored, and fighting to defend their homeland. The Mongols, under commanders reporting to Batu Khan, appeared to be losing. Their cavalry turned and fled. Henry ordered the pursuit. His army broke formation and gave chase. The Mongol retreat was a rehearsed performance. What European commanders across the 13th century consistently failed to understand about Mongol warfare was that discipline for a Mongol cavalry unit meant the ability to flee convincingly under orders, resisting every instinct to turn and fight, while maintaining exact formation until the pre-positioned forces on the flanks were in position to close the trap. The feigned retreat was not a desperate improvisation. It was a practiced, drilled tactical maneuver executed with the precision of a formation advance. Henry II of Silesia died at Legnica. Medieval chronicles report that the Mongols cut off the ears of their dead enemies to count the killed, filling 9 large sacks before the count was complete. 2 days later, on April 11, 1241, the Hungarian army of King Bela IV met the Mongols at the Battle of Mohi. By then, every European court knew about Legnica. Bela's commanders knew about the feigned retreat. The Mongols used it again. The Hungarians pursued anyway, and an estimated 10,000 to 25,000 men died in 2 days. The feigned retreat succeeded not because European commanders were unintelligent, but because the human instinct to pursue a fleeing enemy is older and more powerful than any briefing about Mongol tactics. The Mongol Empire's commanders had built a weapon out of something that could not be unlearned. The Mongols did not win because their enemies were ignorant. They won because they had identified something about the psychology of pursuit that knowledge alone cannot undo. And they built an empire of 24 million square kilometers on that single insight. Number 3. The prince who stopped an army with 20,000 stakes. On the night of June 17, 1462, Vlad III of Wallachia, the prince history would remember as Vlad the Impaler, led a cavalry force of between 7,000 and 10,000 men in a night raid directly into the Ottoman encampment outside his capital city of Târgoviște, Romania. The army he was attacking belonged to Sultan Mehmed II, the same commander who had taken Constantinople in 1453, and it numbered more than 90,000 soldiers. The raid's objective was the assassination of the Sultan himself. Vlad had spent the weeks before the Ottoman advance conducting a scorched earth campaign of remarkable ferocity, poisoning wells, burning crops, and driving plague-ridden civilians toward Ottoman supply lines. He understood he could not fight Mehmed's army in the field. What he needed was not military victory. He needed to make the price of invasion feel greater than the prize. The night raid was the opening act of a psychological operation rather than a conventional battle. The raid caused chaos. Ottoman units attacked each other in the confusion, unable in the darkness to distinguish friend from enemy. Vlad's men struck at the vizier's tents and reportedly came close enough to Mehmed's personal quarters that the Sultan was forced to flee. Ere the assassination failed, Mehmed himself survived. But when the Ottomans regrouped and marched on Targoviste the following days, they found that Vlad had left them something to consider along the road. Outside the capital, lining the approach for what sources describe as covering miles in every direction, stood an estimated 20,000 stakes, each bearing the impaled body of an Ottoman prisoner or Bulgarian collaborator. The Greek historian Chalkokondyles, writing from within Mehmed's own court, recorded that the Sultan was stopped by the sight and declared that it was impossible to take the country from a man who commanded such methods. The Ottoman army turned around. Vlad was eventually captured and imprisoned. Wallachia was not permanently saved. But the man who conquered Constantinople, arguably the most formidable military commander of the 15th century, turned his army home because of what he saw outside a small Wallachian city. Vlad had understood something essential, that at sufficient scale, terror does not merely frighten an enemy. It becomes a wall. Number 2. The general who defended a city with a song. During the spring campaign of 228 AD, Zhuge Liang, chancellor of the kingdom of Shu Han during China's Three Kingdoms period, the most celebrated military strategist of his era, found himself at a small garrison city following the catastrophic loss of the strategic position at Jiading. His main army had been dispatched elsewhere under General Wei Yan. What remained with Zhuge Liang at his exposed position were a handful of soldiers, a few civilian staff, and a reputation so formidable that it had become, by itself, a kind of weapon. The Wei commander Sima Yi arrived with an army described in historical accounts as numbering 150,000 to 200,000 men. The city's gates were open. Zhuge Liang was visible from outside, seated on the battlements above the main gate, dressed in a ceremonial robe, attended by 2 young attendants calmly playing a guqin, a traditional Chinese stringed instrument. The streets below were being swept by soldiers dressed as civilians. There were no defensive formations, there were no banners, there was no sign of the army that Sima Yi's scouts would have expected. Sima Yi, the one commander in Wei considered capable of matching Zhuge Liang's strategic mind, looked at the open city and ordered his army to retreat. Now he was convinced that such a display from a man whose entire reputation rested on meticulous preparation and the avoidance of unnecessary risk could only be a trap too sophisticated for him to identify. Whether the specific encounter between Zhuge Liang and Sima Yi is historical or legendary remains debated by scholars. The Sangguoji, the authoritative record of the Three Kingdoms era, does not confirm it. But the strategic principle it encodes is documented, real, and codified as the 32nd entry in the ancient Chinese military compendium known as the 36 Stratagems. In 2011, economist Christopher Cotton of Queen's University and Chang Liu published a game theory analysis in the Journal of Peace Research demonstrating that the empty fort strategy, presenting a conspicuously undefended position to an enemy who respects your intelligence, is mathematically optimal under precisely the conditions Zhuge Liang faced. The bluff works because it transforms the enemy's own caution into the mechanism of their withdrawal. The empty fort strategy asks nothing of your army because it requires no army. It requires only that your enemy believes you would never do something this obvious unless you had a reason, and that the reason would destroy them. Of all the strategies on this list, it is the only one that operates entirely inside the enemy's mind. Number 1, the siege that gave birth to medical ethics. Around 590 BC, the armies of the Amphictyonic League, a coalition of Greek city-states assembled to defend the sacred sanctuary of Delphi, were facing a problem that walls and weapons had failed to solve. The city of Kira, located near the Gulf of Corinth in what is now central Greece, had been besieging itself behind formidable fortifications for years. Its position was strong, its water supply was secure, its defenders showed no sign of breaking. Then, according to the medical writer Thessalus, recording in the 5th century BC, the earliest and most reliable account we have, a physician named Nabros identified a solution. Nabros was an Asclepiad, a practitioner from the hereditary Greek medical tradition that traced its lineage to the god of healing, Asclepios. He was, according to ancient sources, an ancestor of Hippocrates. His advice to the Amphictyonic commanders was to find the underground water pipe that fed Kira, a pipe whose existence was revealed when a horse's hoof broke through the ground above it, and poison it with hellebore, a toxic plant now identified as likely Helleborus niger, black hellebore, which induces violent and incapacitating diarrhea and vomiting. Later accounts by the Roman military writer Frontinus and the Greek geographer Pausanias add detail. The besiegers cut off the water, waited until Kira's defenders were desperate with thirst, then restored the flow, now carrying hellebore gathered in quantity from the nearby port of Antikythera. The defenders of Kira drank. Within days the garrison was incapacitated. Men who had held the walls against armed assault for years could not stand upright. The Amphictyonic forces stormed an undefended city. Ancient sources record that the entire population was slaughtered, the fields consecrated to Apollo, and the land placed under a curse forbidding cultivation, a curse that the Greek traveler Pausanias, visiting the site 700 years later, around 150 AD, observed was still visibly in effect. The plains around the ruins bore no crops and no trees. Multiple ancient historians, Thessalus, Frontinus, Polyaenus, and Pausanias, each recorded a version of what happened at Kira, attributing the poisoning variously to Nebros, to the Thessalian general Eurylochus, and, in the latest account, to Solon of Athens. That 4 separate writers across 6 centuries felt compelled to attribute the act to different figures speaks to something important: the deep discomfort of ancient civilization with assigning credit for what had been done. Historian Adrienne Mayer, in her academic work Greek Fire, Poison Arrows, and Scorpion Bombs, notes that the ambiguity around authorship may reflect a genuine ancient debate about whether what happened at Kira was a legitimate act of war or something that required a different category entirely. The Hippocratic Oath, the foundational document of Western medical ethics, attributed to Hippocrates in the century after Kira, begins with a commitment that physicians will use their knowledge for healing and never for harm. Hippocrates was, by ancient tradition, a descendant of Nebros. The civilization that gave the world democracy, philosophy, and the principles of ethical medicine may have felt compelled to invent those principles precisely because one of its physicians had first demonstrated what medicine could do when turned in the other direction. The oldest documented act of chemical warfare in Western history did not remain a strategy. It became a problem so serious that the civilization which committed it spent the next century building the ethical framework to ensure it could never be justified again. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.